Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to get a little sip of water, and we're going to get going here. So last week we talked a little bit about work and our culture's ideas of work, and we want to follow on those ideas this week, and we want to kind of move them over into our spiritual practice, into our spiritual life, into our spiritual growth. The title of this morning's talk is A Riddle of Simplicity, and that's a direct quote from the textbook, where Dr. Holmes tells us that we humanity, we have made a riddle of simplicity. We look too hard. We look too far away for God. That the farmer sees him when he plows the field, that the mother sees him when she holds her baby. The presence is here. The presence is now. We have just convinced ourselves that it's too difficult for us to see it, that it is too hard for us to see it. There's a Gnostic gospel, the Gospel of Thomas. And again, these were called Gnostic because the Gnostic level of consciousness is a level about knowing and understanding. And at first, it's a level of knowing that comes through books and through teachers. But then it becomes a level of knowing that comes from within, that comes from, as Dr. Holmes tells us, the ultimate teacher. And Ernest Holmes tells us that there comes a time where we can only be taught and will only be taught by that presence within. That everything else is kind of a path that leads us up to this self-realization, this awakening to the presence of the divine within. And that when we reach that stage of our growth, then our education is more of a revelation, more of a whispering of the sweetness within, loving us and caring for us and guiding us along the way. So we have to recognize that our culture, excuse me, as we talked last week with regards to work, our culture worships busyness. Our culture worships making things harder than they need to be. It is something about the human experience. You know, many years ago, let's see how long ago this was now. It's got to be almost 37 years ago or so, maybe 36. We went on a company picnic. The company that I worked for had rented a family campground in Mocksville, North Carolina. And all of the people who worked for the company were invited to go down there and pitch a tent or bring their RVs or whatever they had. And it was going to be a weekend of family activities. And we were there, and they had a miniature golf course. And we went out with the kids. We all went out to play miniature golf. And there was this little guy, one of my friend's kids, who might have been 2, maybe 2.5 at the time. And he's got his little club and he's got his little ball, and he doesn't have a clue what this whole game is about. He's never seen it before. This is his first time going to play miniature golf. So his father explains to him, he says, the idea is to get this ball, and you know, miniature golf, we've all got our own color of the balls. He says, this is your ball, this color is your ball. He says, and the idea is for you to get that ball in that hole down there. That's the object of the game. Do you understand? And the little guy, you know how little ones shake their head? They don't have an idea what you're talking about. I understand. He says, okay, it's your turn, go. Well, the little guy walked down the other end of the little putt-putt hole and stood right over the hole, and of course he wasn't that tall anyway, and he just leaned down, put the ball in the hole, and dropped it. Turned around, walked away. You know, he said, well, what's so hard about that? You know, he got it the first time, and we just laughed. We just laughed because he did exactly what he was told. He got the ball in the hole. See, but the idea is that if you just walk down and put the ball in the hole, well, that's too easy. That's too easy. We have to find a way to make it difficult. There has to be a degree of difficulty involved for we as human beings to be interested in it. If it was just too easy, we wouldn't do it. So they've got to put the little windmills in the way and all the other things that they do in order to make it make it tougher for us to get the ball in the hole. If you remember the movie The Matrix came out, I don't know how long ago now, maybe 15, 20 years ago now. But the idea of the Matrix was that human beings were all stuck in a dream. The Matrix, it was Carl Jung's collective unconscious. And the human bodies were wired up and being used as batteries, as power supplies by the robots that had taken over the world. And somehow these machines had figured out how to manipulate human dreams. So the human beings were just kind of in these little catacomb things and just existing, just producing energy for the use of the robots. But the consciousness of the human was caught up in a dream. And in that dream, you know, they could go anywhere they want, they could do anything they want. They were being programmed by the robots. And there comes a time in the movie where the person who's kind of speaking on behalf of the system of the robots says that when the robots first took over, they made all of the dreams pleasant. But the human beings were not satisfied with that. They kept awakening from the dream. They needed something to struggle against. They needed a sense of struggle in order to keep them occupied. So the robots began to program problems into the dreams. And it was these problems, it was staying engaged in these problems in the dreams that kept the human being stuck in the dream. And of course, very, very metaphysical meanings that we could take away from that. But the idea that if something is easy, if it's too easy, we're not interested in it. There has to be an obstacle. There has to be a problem in order for us to push forward. In fact, I was reading a week or so ago. I was reading about some of the ancient ideas about good and evil, the problem of evil, as theologians call it, and this idea of the devil, which is not a very ancient idea. It did not exist in ancient Judaism at the time that the Genesis was written, but it is an idea that more or less entered our culture through the Persians, through Zoroastrianism, and through the Babylonian captivity. When the Hebrews were carried away to Babylon in captivity, they got exposed to these ideas. And it was in this, what is called the intertestamental period, the time between the Old and the New Testament, that this idea of the Prince of Darkness really started to come into being. And then it was later in the first century, in the 500 or 600 ADs, that many of the ideas about Satan and the devil that we hold in our culture today actually came to be. They actually came into being. A lot of it came from Islam. So we have to keep in mind that this idea of the devil as a fallen angel who's trying to win souls and get them into hell, that is something that came along kind of later in theology. But at the very beginning of the idea of thought, the idea of a Satan was the one who put the obstacles in the way, the one who made things difficult for people to keep them interested so that they would grow. And in that case, in that way of thinking, the Satan of the olden times was not working against God, but was working for God by keeping people interested, because it created the stimulus for people to start to ask the deeper questions in life. So there's something in the human psyche that says it has to be hard. If it's to be valuable, it has to be hard. We have to find a way to make it hard. We have to keep busy. We have to create the illusion that it's hard and it's difficult, and we're always working all the time, and we've got our cell phones and our emails going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have to get up in the middle of the night and respond to a crisis at work, because the harder it is, the better it is. Think about gold. Gold is extremely valuable because it's hard to find, right? It's not easy. If suddenly somebody found an entire mountain in the Himalayas that was made out of solid gold, gold would suddenly not be worth very much anymore. But it's hard. You can go out to the stream and you can get a little pan and you can pan all day long and you can get 1/4 of an ounce. We used to do that with the kids when we lived in Colorado. You have gold mines in parts of the world that go down miles and miles underground, and they bring the rocks out, the ore out, and they crush them and they try to extract the gold ore. It's not easy, and because it's not easy, it's valuable. And its value is recognized not in just one culture, but it's almost a universal currency. That you can go anywhere and you can use gold to get whatever it is that you want. And if you think, on the other hand, if you look at sand, well, sand, it's everywhere. Sand, you live at the beach, sand is everywhere. It blows up in your yard, How valuable was sand? Well, not very valuable. You can buy a truckload of sand for not too much, because they're charging you for the transportation charges and digging it up, loading it on the truck, and not much more than that. So we have developed a culture that worships busyness. It worships difficulty. If somebody is at work, think of somebody at work and they're extremely good at what they do, and their job looks easy, everybody thinks, well, they're not working hard enough. They're just not working hard enough, They don't seem to be caught up in the drama. They don't seem to be caught up in the crisis. They're just there and they're smiling all the time. There's something wrong with those people. Apparently they don't know what's going on around here. And our culture has adopted and accepted this universal belief that it needs to be difficult. It needs to be hard. And if it's not hard, we find ways to make it hard. Excuse me. We kind of sabotage ourselves, and we find ways to make things more difficult than they need to be. I think if we look at the world in which we live, we can see that that's so. We can see that is how it is. But it doesn't have to be that way. And the great spiritual teachers of ages have told us it doesn't have to be that way. That we are the ones who have created the system that has made it that difficult. It is us, humanity, that is doing it. As I mentioned last week, there are parts of the world where people were living in virtual paradise. And when the Europeans got on their sailing ships and arrived in paradise, they told the people, you're not working hard enough. You're lazy. There's this idea that it needs to be hard. It needs to be difficult. And that carries over into our spiritual growth. What is the most valuable thing in our entire lives? And if we stop and think about it, I think we will eventually say it is our soul. It is our spirit. It is our spiritual growth. It is awakening to the presence of the divine within. It is growing a little every day into a deeper realization of the presence of God. I mean, we recognize, there's part of us that recognizes it, and there's part of us that wants to pretend it's not so, but we must recognize that everything in this world is turning to dust. Everything is fading away. Right? Someday the continental plates will kind of slide under one another, and everything that's built, our cities, all of that will kind of fold back into the mantle of the earth and turn back into molten rock. The businesses that we build, the homes that we build, the bodies that we use, all of this is turning to dust. So none of this lasts forever. But the one thing that does last forever is our spirit, is our soul. So the most important thing that we have, the most valuable thing that we have, is really our spirituality, the growth of our soul, growing every day in the presence and the experience of God. But if we believe that things need to be difficult, if that's what our culture believes, then we will carry that over into our idea of how are we going to grow spiritually. We will carry it over into an idea that that spiritual growth is not for everybody. See, spiritual growth. Now, when I was a kid growing up, we were taught about the saints who had the beatific vision, the vision of God, which today we would call the Christ consciousness, the cosmic consciousness, enlightenment, awakening, all of these different terms that we might recognize in the modern world. We were taught that there were certain people they called saints who were blessed with this vision, that is the experience of the presence of God. And of course, when you're told that as a kid, you think, well, that sounds good to me. How do I get there? Sign me up. I'm ready to go. And what we're told is, well, it's not for you. It's only for special people who get to live in monasteries or caves or a cloistered life or things like that, and they're selected, specially chosen by God for this experience. So my point is that this idea of pursuing the experience of the presence of God, the direct experience of the presence of God that we talk about, we were kind of turned away from that. It was too difficult. The average person who had to get up and go to work in the morning, go to school in the morning, make a living, raise a family, all of those things that our human life requires us to do, we were told that the chances of that person having such an experience were very, very little. It would have to be some kind of a gift from God, in which case there was nothing that anyone could do anyway, because a gift is a gift. There's nothing you can do to make the gift happen. So this concept then that spiritual growth needs to be difficult. Spiritual growth needs to be something that is hard. Spiritual growth is something that is reserved for only a select few who are fortunate enough to have been chosen and to live in a world apart from this world, a special world where they can dedicate all of their time, every minute of every day, to their spiritual growth. They were the ones that would get to have the vision, the experience of God. Everybody else, the best we could do was to follow the rules and to hope that when we die that we pass muster and we get to go to heaven. And if you think about it, what has happened is people have come along and they have put themselves in that position between us and God. And we have accepted that. We have accepted other people telling us that, well, God speaks to them and tells them what to tell us, and if we do what they tell us to do, then we'll be okay. But we are not qualified to speak directly to God. We are not qualified to have this divine communication. We need to rely on somebody else to have it for us. And basically, what the rules are is do what they tell you to do and contribute to their support, give them money. And if we do that, and if we follow the rest of the rules, then that's the best we could hope for. In the early days, the first couple hundred years of Christianity, there was this rift between the Orthodox Church and the Gnostics. Now, you remember I tell you at level one, which is what I call the Orthodox, it's about power and control. The authority is out there, and our behavior is to please those in authority so they will give us what we want. That is kind of the Orthodox view of the world. Follow the rules kind of a thing. Somebody else has all the power kind of a thing. When we start to move into what is the Gnostic mode, it is not so much about doing what somebody else tells us to do as it is understanding why this is something that we need to do. So Emmett Fox would tell us that for people who need to be told not to steal each other's shoes, the commandment, thou shalt not steal, means exactly what it says. Stop stealing your neighbor's stuff. But as we move into the Gnostic level, as we start to become more interested in, well, what does that mean? Did God just come down come down onto earth and make the ground shake and make the bush burn without consuming, and all of these things that were given in the biblical story. And then God said, tell them not to steal each other's stuff? Or is there a deeper meaning to that? See, so when we get into that Gnostic stage of growth, we start to ask ourselves, well, what is this deeper meaning? What is this deeper meaning? What does it really mean to me personally? What does it mean to me? And as we grow in that second level, as I said earlier, we start with teachers, and we start with books, and we start with courses, and all of those things are good, and they are good aids on our path. But eventually we get to a point where we want to know from experience. We want to know not only from external experience, but we want to know from internal experience. So we go through a phase of knowing about. We've studied it and we know about it. And then we've internalized it. We understand what it means to us. We've processed it. It has now become part of what we truly understand, not just because somebody told us, but because we have worked with the idea. We have had some experience. But then we move into the third phase, level 3, which is now we live it. Now we live it. So as the Gnostic movement became more and more popular, right, it was a threat to authority, as would be what was called, the Protestant Revolution hundreds of years later, 1,000 years later. It was a threat to authority because here you had people who were in a position of authority said, hey, God talks to us and we're going to tell you what you need to know. Just do what we tell you and you'll be okay. And then you had the Gnostics who said, God is present in everyone's heart, and we can learn how to grow and to get that guidance from within. So there was this great turmoil, and there was a leader of the church, Origen, who wrote scathing epistles about what was wrong with the Gnostics. And finally he told people, he said, listen, if when you die you go to the judgment and you stand before God and God asks you why you did something, you tell them it's because we, the church, told you what to do. And if there was something wrong with that, then we're the ones that suffer the consequences, not you. God is going to let you go because you are only following orders. And we are the ones that are going to have to be accountable for it. In other words, this whole argument was an argument based on authority. And I read that and I said, well, what if God says, why didn't you use the brain that I gave you to figure out whether or not what they were telling you is true? Why didn't you turn within to the presence of the divine within to find for yourself? As it says somewhere in the Bible, you have to test the gods to see if they're true gods. You have to test these ideas. Or as Emerson said, don't take anybody else's word for what's good or bad. You have to find out for yourself. You have to determine for yourself. So there was this idea then that, excuse me, the ordinary person, the lay person, wasn't good enough or smart enough or capable of knowing and having this experience. They needed somebody in between in order to intercede for them. And a lot of our culture, this is where it came from. Now, there's a couple reasons why. I want to just briefly touch on those, why this came up. And of course, there's a problem with it. As I said, there's a problem with that, in that ultimately no one can do your spiritual growth for you. It's like somebody saying, I tell you what, I'm going to go down to the gym for you. I'm going to work out for a couple of hours, and your cardiovascular health is going to improve. It doesn't work that way. You see, each one of us has to go to the gym on our own. Each one of us has to do our spiritual practice on our own. And this idea that it's difficult and somebody else can help us, or somebody else can do it for us, it persists even till today. I mean, if you go on the internet, there's absolutely no shortage of advertisements for opportunities for spiritual retreats where people can spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to go on this so-called retreat where you're going to learn learn techniques and secrets of the hidden secrets of the masters. And it's going to help you to grow. And of course, that's just appealing to the idea, well, it has to be difficult, and I know something you don't know, and I'm going to sell you that knowledge if you'll just pay and come to this event. So we have to step back and ask ourselves, well, wait a second, where did this come from, and what's the truth here? So I want you to consider this. We as human beings, we have the experience of the intellect, and we have the experience of the ego. The intellect's child is the ego. The intellect is curious. It is always wanting to know. It is always wanting to understand. And literally, it always wants to be right, It just absolutely always wants to be right. And if you think back to the story of the Garden of Eden, the tree that Adam and Eve ate from was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't a tree of good and evil. It was the knowledge of good and evil. In order for human beings to have a full experience, they had to be able to have the knowledge of good and evil. They had to be able to have the full realm of possibilities before them. And remember, it was Satan in the form of the serpent that told people, hey, you need to have this experience. It was this curiosity. It was go out and make it difficult. Go out and have experiences that seem good. Have experiences that seem bad. And it's going to help you to grow. It's not going to be pleasant, but it's going to help you to grow. So the thing that moved people out of the paradise of Eden in the story is this intellect. It is this desire to know. It is this desire to know what the gods know. It is this desire to understand, and that is the curiosity that drove us out of the garden, if you will. Not as a punishment, but as a way of growth, as a way of us having the experience that we need to have so that we can come to know God more personally in some unique and some wonderful way. And in this story, when Adam and Eve left the garden, there were two guards that were put there at the garden, two angels with flaming swords, two cherubim. And in the Buddhist tradition, there's a similar idea. You'll see, as Joseph Campbell tells us, you'll see statues, and as the Buddha sitting in quiet repose inside a cave, holding his palm out, kind of like a crossing guard might hold their palm out to stop traffic. Excuse me. And in front of the cave on either side are these two ugly-looking monsters. It's the same image that you have in the Garden of Eden. And what those two things are that keep us from entering the garden are our desires and our ego, our fears. So what we have done is we have gone out on this quest to discover God in our own unique way. Our soul is on its quest. This is King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. They're always questing for the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the presence of the divine within. You and I are on that quest to discover the presence of the divine within. And along the way, they have to overcome many obstacles, right? But those obstacles are, for us, internal obstacles. So the intellect has convinced us that it is capable of knowing everything that there is to know, and it is capable of being right. And it wants to be right. Oh my God, it wants to be right. If you want to motivate somebody to do something, just kind of infer that if they don't do that, they will be perceived to be wrong, that they will be perceived to be inadequate in some way. People will move heaven and earth in order to not be perceived to be wrong. Think about the Hubble telescope. Go to the Hubble telescope site on the web and look out at the vastness of the cosmos. Look out at as Carl Sagan used to say, the billions and billions of stars out there. And think about where we are in that. We're on this tiny speck of dust. On the scale of the cosmos, it is a tiny speck of dust, a tiny rock. Tiny rock that's whooping around the helium furnace. If you're standing at the equator of the Earth, every hour you have moved 1,000 miles. You have moved 1,000 miles as the Earth and you with it have rotated. And the Earth has moved 67,000 miles in its orbit around the sun. And the sun has moved in its position in the galaxy. And the galaxy has changed its position in the universe. And the universe as we know it, may be one of only bazillions of multiverses. And we have this vastness there that goes beyond our ability to understand, and yet our intellect tells us it's capable of figuring it all out. That it knows. I mean, we have the arrogance of saying, well, there's no evidence for this or there's no evidence for that. Of all of this vastness of the universe, we are looking at an infinitesimal, a very, very small amount of it. And we have the arrogance to say, well, it's not so because we have no evidence. To me, it's like going down to the ocean with an eyedropper and sucking up an eyedropper full of seawater and looking at it and saying, we have no evidence that whales exist. We have no evidence that fish exist. There are none in here. We can't see them. And the point, of course, is ridiculous, and it's meant to be ridiculous because it's pointing out how arrogant the intellect is. And the intellect is misleading us by telling us that it can understand. And there are things that the intellect cannot understand. There are things that the intellect cannot know. But yet the intellect deludes us into believing that it can. The ego is a creation of the intellect. The ego is just merely a collection of intellectual ideas about who and what we are and the way things ought to be. So I ask you to consider that the you that you are exists only as an idea in your mind. I have a totally different idea in my mind about who and what you are. You have a totally different idea about me, about who and what I am, than I have. And this ego is a creation of the intellect. The ego is this conglomeration of ideas about who we are and the way things ought to be. And the ego's purpose seems to be to defend, to struggle. So the intellect wants to be right, and the ego wants to prevail. And as we embark on our spiritual journey, then what happens is the intellect says, I want to understand it. And the ego says, it has to be hard, and we have to struggle to prevail in order to get there. Spiritual growth has to be difficult. We have to find a way to make it difficult. And the intellect keeps saying, and we have to do it with our mind, and we have to go learn more, and we have to study more, and we have to read more books and go to more lectures and all of these other things. And there are people who know more than we do, so we need to go and be with those people who know more than we do. And the ego says, we've got to make a way for that to happen. We have to sacrifice, we have to struggle in order to pay all this money to go to these things. And of course what happens is what that is doing is it is distracting us from the simplicity. Ernest Holmes has said we have made a riddle out of simplicity. So stop very quickly and think about this. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? And the very love and the very presence of God has created everything in the universe out of itself. It has created that which we call you and I, and I'm not talking about our bodies. I'm talking about our soul. I'm talking about our spirit. It has created that which we call the spirit out of itself. It is some part of itself. It had nothing else to create from. Now what that means is that it recognizes us as it recognizes itself. It doesn't see this idea of separation that we have intellectually we have created by the act of leaving the garden is the best way to put it, by the act of going out on our own to having the experience that we wanted to have in order to discover God in some unique way. But that separation only exists as an idea in our consciousness. In actuality, it cannot exist because God cannot be separate from its creation. No more than the ocean can be separate from its waves. And we look at the wave, and the wave is not all that the ocean is. But everything that the wave is some part of the ocean. And if we look at ourselves, we are not all that God is. But everything that we are is some part of God, because it has been created by God, out of God. So we start to get this idea then of just how precious we are to the divine. That it is nearer to us than our hands and feet, that it is closer to us than our breath. It is omnipresence, it is everywhere present, so it is present right here where we are. It is not out there far away and we have to struggle to get to it. It is here already. And we have to stop struggling to get to it. Like the ripples on the pond that keep us from seeing the great jewel that's lying right below the surface. It is these arguments that the intellect keeps giving us that this needs to be harder, this needs to be difficult, we need to find a way to make this hard. Or the ego telling us that we have to find a way to struggle and prevail. And we have to move beyond mind. That is my point. We have to move beyond mind. In Eastern meditation, they talk about arriving at the point where mind falls off. Arriving at the point in meditation where the body falls off. We must remember that as we embark in earnest on our spiritual practice, the intellect and the ego kind of put up obstacles. They try to get in our way. I was listening to a lecture one time by a Buddhist monk, and it was an introductory lecture at a meditation gathering. And people were going for what they called a big sit. This was a 10-hour meditation. They were gathered together in a room somewhere. They had their little meditation cushions, and they were going to sit on it. And they were going to sit there and meditate for 10 hours. And the monk explained to him, now get your cushion and make yourself as comfortable as possible for now. But I have to tell you, even if that cushion was a waterbed, and it was the most comfortable cushion that you ever sat on in your life, that before long you will be uncomfortable. You will be uncomfortable because your intellect and your ego are resisting the meditation. They are resisting you moving beyond mind. They are resisting you moving beyond body. They're giving you aches and pains. They're giving you thoughts to distract you. And the secret of the big sit, the secret of the successful meditation was not that you would not have any discomfort. Not that you would not have distracting thoughts, but that you would maintain your focus on your breath or whatever your particular object of meditation would be. So that these attempts by the intellect and the ego to distract you, to make it more difficult than it needed to be, that you wouldn't become entangled with them. So what we want to keep in mind then is we want to keep it simple. The very presence is right here and right now. It created us out of itself to discover itself and left us alone to make that discovery. We are the ones who have decided along the way that it would be difficult and it would be hard, and we built organizations to reinforce for us the idea that it would be hard and somebody else could do it for us. You know, one of the things that we learned early on in practitioner training is that our goal as a practitioner when someone came to us for treatment was to teach them how to do treatment so that they didn't become dependent upon us. We didn't want to establish a codependent relationship where people thought, well, I have to go to my practitioner all the time. That was old school idea, right? I have all the information, I have all the power, you have none, you have to come to me. That was the old, excuse me, old way of thinking. but rather our goal was to empower people to discover that the power to pray, a positive prayer, an affirmative prayer, the ability to change one's mind already existed within the individual. So the love of God has created us out of itself. It has left us alone to make the discovery, and it has not abandoned us. It has not abandoned us. It has not gone away. Frederick Bales tells us that if you think about the miracle of a fetus as it grows in the womb, 2 cells become 4, and 4 become 8, and so on, and some become eyes, and some become bones, and some become lungs. And the little body practices breathing the embryonic fluid before it's even born. And as the baby is passing down the birth canal, its little lungs are collapsed by the pressure of the birth canal to get all of that fluid out of the lungs. So that as the head enters the world, as the body enters the world and the lungs expand, it draws its first breath easily. The air already waiting, the love of God already providing it for it before it was born. The entire process set up for success. And Bales tells us that that same love and that same intelligence did not abandon us at the moment of birth, but is still with us right here and right now. So the secret of our success, then, if you want to call it success, is to stop making it so difficult. Stop making a riddle of simplicity. The divine is already here. The divine is already now. The image of the Buddha sitting in the cave with its palm raised is a way of saying, be still and know. Shh. Pay no attention to the distractions of the world. Shh. Pay no attention to the ideas of your mind. Pay no attention to the struggles of your ego. All of these things are fading into the nothingness from which they came. But the ultimate reality, the presence of the divine within, is already here. And the way to realize it is not by struggle, not by making it harder, not by thinking that we have to do more of this or more of that or more of the other thing, or to go to someone else to do it for us. But we must be willing to accept the responsibility and the accountability that we are the only ones who can do it for ourselves. And the answer is simplicity. Be still and know. I was reading a little bit this week about the Shakers, and Ken Burns, the Civil War documentarian Ken Burns, one of his first documentaries was on the Shakers. And it's available on the PBS website, about 50 minutes long, and well worth it if you get a chance to watch it. And the Shakers were part of the Quaker movement. They were actually first called the Shaken Quakers. And the Quaker movement, as it emerged, was about pushing away all of the external hierarchy of the organized church of the day, the Anglican Church, and recognizing that the divine presence was within each and every one. And they didn't have clergy when they started. People would go to the meeting house and they would sit there in meditation until each and every one had their experience, whatever that experience might be at that time. And the Shakers were kind of an offshoot of that, and they believed that as we felt the Spirit move within us, we moved with it. We would dance. We would dance the ecstatic dance. Almost if you get a picture of the whirling dervishers and the Sufis in movement, the body in movement. And the Shakers were officially called the universal believers in the second coming of Christ. And that second coming could be in the individuals as each and every individual awakened to the Christ consciousness within. Something that we would say today, that the revelation is not this big bang event where everybody has it all at the same time, but an individual unfoldment of consciousness, where we each unfold into the Christ consciousness, into the Buddha consciousness, into the awakening, into the enlightenment, into the cosmic consciousness, into the beatific vision, whatever terms we choose to call it. And when the Shakers came to this country, they were one of the first and the longest lasting of the utopian societies were a community. Property was held by the community. And the goal, of each and every one was to grow into this experience of the divine. And they believed that their work was an expression of God. And it wasn't a drudge, but it was a simplicity, that they would do things simply but very well. This is why, those of you who are familiar with furniture, the shaker furniture is still in demand today because they made it so well. Ken Burns said he started out his interest in the documentary when he passed a round barn, and he said, why did people build their barn in the round instead of in the square the way that they always had? And it was a shaker barn, and they built it in the round and they built it in a hillside because it was more efficient. Instead of having to hoist the hay bales up to the loft, they just drove the wagon up the hill and unloaded the hay in the upper level. By having all the cattle in the round, a person standing on the upper level could throw the hay down into the center of the barn, and all of the cows could easily reach it. And it was an expression of their idea of, we don't have to work harder, we don't have to make it more difficult, but we can use the God-given talent we have to make it simple, but to do it well, because what we do is an expression of God's love here on this earth. Very simple teaching, very, very simple way of life. Of course, it's died out over the years because one of their basic tenets was celibacy, so they weren't procreating and growing their population. They had to continue to recruit. And this idea of not having stuff to call our own and being celibate was not something that appealed to our modern society. But the idea of keep it simple. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be hard. So what is the most important thing in our life? And I would have to say it's our spiritual growth. And how do we develop our spiritual growth? And it's by being still and knowing. It is by seeing the goodness of God in everything that we do. It is by the practice of gratitude. There's a little prayer, a meme that goes around on Facebook every once in a while from the Dalai Lama that says, when you awaken in the morning, remind yourself, I have awakened. I have another day. I have precious human life. I'll not waste it. How will you use the day? Can we see the love and the activity of God in everyone we meet? Can we be like the farmer who plows the field and sees the activity of God, the mother who holds the child to her breast and sees the activity of God? Can we marvel at the sunrise and the sunset and the birds in the air and the lilies of the field? Can we recognize that the distractions of the world are nothing but that, the distractions of the world? That which tells us it needs to be difficult or we're not smart enough are just distractions. That the omniscience of God is right where we are. Emma Curtis Hopkins would say the immutableness of God is right where we are. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can get in its way. So rather than think that it needs to be difficult, I had a lady who came to one of our meditation workshops and said, I don't understand this. I've been meditating at 90 miles an hour and I'm not getting anything out of it. Aha. Doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to get on an airplane and fly halfway around the world to go to a sacred place. It may help you to have a different feeling, but it's not necessary. For the sacred place is within. The greatest teacher is within. The greatest love is within. And it is when we move beyond the grasping and the aversion of the intellect, and when we move beyond the fear and the struggle of the ego, It is when we recognize that they are nothing pretending to be something. When we're willing to just sit in stillness, in joy, in appreciation of what God hath wrought. Then what we start to find is that love, that joy, that presence that was always with us, that has never left us, starts revealing itself to us to a greater degree. It's as if it says, well, about time. Well, it's about time. The poet says it lays in quiet repose, awaiting our discovery. So wherever you are this week, this day, I invite you to just make some time. Don't make it difficult, but just make some time to simply go and be with God. God is always with us. We don't always realize it. Make some time to go and realize it. Be still. If ideas come up telling you what you need to be doing instead of sitting there, just ignore them. If ideas come up and telling you about struggles that you have to engage in, things that you need to do, people that you need to argue with or convince, excuse me, just ignore them. Just be still. Let it be simple. Pick up a blade of grass and look at what a miracle you have in your hand. Think of what you are, an expression of God. And think of what a miracle this world has in you. You are a beautiful expression of God. The divine has created you out of itself and equipped you with everything that you will ever need. Ernest Holmes said, if you found yourself on a desert island in the middle of an ocean without any books at all, then eventually you would discover the presence within. That is what we wish to discover. That is what we wish to experience. It is beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, as Rumi said. It is beyond ideas of struggle. It is beyond ideas of knowing. We will know, but not at the level of the idea. We will know from the internal experience that God's love and God's presence is with us. And each and every one of us is just as capable of this experience. As a matter of fact, it's inevitable that we shall have it. But each and every one of us is just as capable as the greatest of the saints. So I invite you today, surrender. Surrender to the simplicity. Stop making it difficult if you have been. And find a way today to make your celebration of the presence of God as you as simple as possible. And so it is.